Indeed, by faith our ancestors received approval, and by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's. Through this, he received approval as righteous. God himself giving approval to his gifts, he died. But through his faith, he still speaks. And by faith, Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death, and he was not found because God had taken him. For it was attested before he was taken away that he had pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whoever would approach God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, warned by God and about events as yet unseen, respected the warning and built an ark to save his household. And by this he condemned the world and became an heir to the righteousness that is in accordance with the faith. And by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was set to receive as an inheritance. And he set out not knowing where he was going. And by faith, he stayed for a time in the land he had promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him to the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, with Sarah's involvement, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old, because he considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars of heaven, and as numerable as the grains of sand by the seashore. All of these died in faith, without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth, for people who speak in this way make it clear they are seeking a homeland. And if they had been thinking of the land that they had left behind, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better homeland, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Indeed, he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when put to the test, offered up Isaac, who had received the promises and was ready to offer up his only son, of whom he had been told, "It is through Isaac that descendants shall be named for you." He considered the fact that God is able even to raise someone from the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And by faith, Isaac invoked blessings for the future on Jacob and Esau. And by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the top of his staff. And by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his burial. And by faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered abuse suffered for the Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, unafraid of the king's anger, for he persevered as though he saw him who is invisible. And by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. And by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in the skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. Yet, all of these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
That is a long passage. I just couldn't help myself. Whose faith do you value more if you're choosing in that passage where to stop? Well, I want to talk to you today about cattle for a brief moment. Did you know that the state of Missouri produces about 4 million heads of cattle in a year? That comes out to just under 4% of the national total of cows produced in a year. Now, I have seen some cows in Missouri, but there is a problem because cows take up a lot of room, right? They need grazing room unless you're growing them in a feedlot. And cows smell really, really bad. And cows are messy, right? So you will not find a lot of cows in downtown New York City. You will not find a lot in Los Angeles, and you will certainly not find a lot in Philadelphia, because even if they wanted to graze cows there, they just don't have the space, right? But it wasn't always like that. In the mid-1800s, there were cows grazing around the base of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. And there are no photographs of this, but there are political cartoons. The cows were brought in to hang out at the monument because there was a grassy area there, and the Union Army wanted some space for their cows to get fed before they killed them to feed soldiers. In fact, they called the cows' home the Cow Depot Monument during the war because the monument itself wasn't finished. It was sitting there 152 feet in the air, just a flat chunk in the middle of Washington, D.C. with cows around it. And it looks pretty funny and pretty bleak because it turns out nation building relies a lot on faith. You have to think about how divided we are today in this country, and we all have different opinions on different issues, and I bet I could name 10 different things and get 10 different opinions on every one of them and a lot of arguments if I were to go online and make some bold statements. We think we're so divided and it's never been worse, but that's not true, of course. There was a moment when the country was so divided that they had a civil war where people were fighting about these issues that seemed really important, that were perhaps really important, and we had people saying, we will fight to keep ourselves unified. That would be the Union. We forget that together as one nation came at a large cost. So we had a lot of men and women who were willing to not only to fight, but to kill one another for something that they had not yet seen, because they had faith that there was something better beyond what they were living in. They were fighting for unification and abolition, of course, and peace. And through it all, even though the nation was raging, quite literally, people were dying, and there was quite literally a manifested crisis at the center of the country. All of that time, the faithful cattle were grazing placidly around the base of the Washington Monument. And even though there was all this fighting, people were going about their daily lives, getting married and celebrating anniversaries, having babies and celebrating birthdays, and thinking about how much a loaf of bread costs and how frustrated they were undoubtedly with the traffic, because I'm pretty sure even worse traffic in DC was awful in the 1800s. Sometimes, by faith, they could persevere through the awful. Sometimes faith is a really tricky thing to hang on to when everything looks awful, because the circumstances seem far too difficult and because it's just way too hard to understand why we should keep pressing in and having faith and enduring. Surely the American Revolution saw that too. The British Empire was the biggest empire in the world, and it was a monumental task to try and fight them. But at its helm sat George Washington, a battlefield leader and later a president, a man who became so popular that people were willing to put blind faith into his reputation. They would do whatever he said because they trusted that he would do the right thing. So yes, faith in a person is a demonstrable thing, right? Americans love Washington. Maybe we still do because we can point to things that he did. And we can have faith in those things working out. Faith, but based in past performance. It feels a little like the people in our scripture who are saying, you've been faithful to me already, I'll be faithful to you. And God rewards it over and over again. So we all do this a little bit, right? Trust me, have a little faith in me, goes the song. It means you know who I am because you've known me from the past. And it seems that Washington was a man to be trusted, and it wasn't surprising at all that while he was still alive, the Congress met and said he deserves a monument. I want to stop for a moment and just remind you that if it's ever crossed your mind, why is it a Washington monument and not a Washington memorial? It's a Lincoln memorial. It's a Jefferson memorial. It's a Washington monument because he was still alive when they decided to make it. The National Park Service is clear. When Congress voted to do this, he was still alive. But, like any monument, they had no funding. So they had to figure out how to get some. So there was this idea that they brought forward in faith to fund it, long before they had the money and long before they had the location for it. So he died in 1799, and they didn't have any funding, and it took them until 1848 to break ground. Just a little fun fact for you, the people of the groundbreaking included Polk, who was president at the time, Buchanan, Johnson, Dolly Madison, who was very old by that moment, Eliza Hamilton, and Abraham Lincoln stood in the audience as they broke that ground. What a moment. The construction of a new monument. Think about how exciting it would have been to be there at that moment. That's what groundbreakings are, right? A moment of faith in things unseen. I want you to think back with me, if you will, to March 1st of 2025. Anybody remember what they were doing on March 1st, 2025? I bet I know what at least one of you was doing. That was the day the new ground was broken for the new Callaway Elementary School. And I'm pretty sure that some of you were there. By faith, that day, we broke ground that the project would be completed. In faith, we thought, there is funding for this. In faith, we said, the contractors can be trusted. In faith, we said, the community will build a school to see us beyond where we are today into a brighter future. And today, that's come to fruition. Our faith has paid off because we stand ready to begin a brand new school year in a brand new school. Faith in a groundbreaking is one thing. A man named Robert Mills originally designed the Washington Monument, but it looked a little different. It had a round platform, and underneath the platform were a series of columns, and inside those columns were supposed to be 30 statues of founding revolutionary leaders. And on top of the platform was supposed to be a statue of Washington with a chariot and a team of horses, looking very noble. And then out of the middle of that, behind him, was the obelisk we now kind of think about. Mills thought to himself, this is going to be an epic monument for an epic man. We need to have this big monument. And so he estimated in 1848 that this would cost about $1 million in their money at that time, which is a lot of money today. Well, they thought, we probably can't get that much money. We're getting ready to do a lot of other things in nation building. And so they stripped it of the platform and the statues and the people, and they said, we can make it cheaper. We'll just make it the obelisk in the middle. Mills, apparently miffed at having his design rejected, said, and I kid you not, I love this quote, he said, that's just gonna look like a stalk of asparagus in the middle of the mall, and it will be ridiculous. And so now I can't get that out of my mind, and every time I look at it, I'm gonna think about asparagus, which is a weird association. But they were trying to figure out how to make it cheaper. Doesn't this sound like us today? Because we're always trying to figure out, how can we cut that cost just a little bit more? Well, they had this idea, and I kind of like this plan. They thought what they would do is ask every citizen, man and woman, to give them $1. And they really wanted that $1. They figured if everybody did it, they would have enough money to build a monument. And what they were thinking was, this is going to be the perfect equal giving campaign. If you wanted to give $10, they said no. Can you imagine? If you want to give more than $10 to anywhere, they'll let you, right? They said, absolutely not. Only $1 per person. That way it's equal. And nobody who has a lot of money gets to say they paid for more of it. And nobody who has very little money gets to say they didn't contribute, because everybody will have given us a single dollar. So that's what they did. And they got a lot of money. They got enough to start. And then they started building it. And I'm not an architect, and I don't know very much about how to build things well. But the first part was get a firm foundation. And so they had to dig and do all those kinds of things, which they did. And they started building, and they built it 152 feet up in the air. And then they ran out of money. And then there was a civil war. And then it sat there for 20 years at 152 feet, which is about a fifth of what it should be. Can you imagine, if you will, to think about what that would be like, to be strolling around in Washington, D.C. in, I don't know, 1860, and looking at that and thinking, they're never going to finish it. It's been sitting there for 12 years. It's just going to keep sitting there. How disappointing. And at the other end of the mall, if you're familiar with the way D.C. looks, sat the Capitol Dome, which was also not finished because they quit when they were constructing, they quit the construction to go fight a civil war. It's difficult to imagine how hopeless that would be. If you were wandering around and just saw cows out there, it would feel like maybe your faith was a bit like those crumbling bricks of monument. Maybe you had built at it, and sometimes we build at it and it feels good, and then it just stalls and it starts to crumble, and we forget how to utilize our faith in the best way, and it feels like we've maybe just abandoned it. It's really hard to have something to keep your faith in something for a long period of time. It's easy to succumb to hopelessness. And it's really easy to wallow in things that haven't turned out the way we'd hoped for. It's easy to say, I'm sad and I'm weary, and just wrap ourselves up in disappointment. But it's much more difficult to say to ourselves, I'm going to keep a glimmer of faith that will someday get finished. A spark of hope. The world will bring us down over and over again. And if we listen to the news, we might wonder, how did we get here? Do we even still have faith if we're ignoring our church or ignoring our mission for too long? Earlier in the book of Matthew, Jesus says, O ye of little faith, to the disciples in the middle of that storm. Because faith is meant to be a vibrant, living thing. We build it and we solidify it and we store it up to use when we lack some later. We come to worship and we serve our neighbors out in the world, and we watch for God's signs all around us. And soon we realize that our faith is growing and we didn't really even know it. All of a sudden a crisis comes, and it will. And where do we rest? We rest on our faith. But only if we've already built it up. When the losses seem too big to bear, then we see how strong our foundations were to begin with. We can curl up on those stones and rest on the faith we've already built, and we take refuge in the Lord whom we already believed in. This morning's passage is sometimes called the heroes of faith. And the next verse actually has those beautiful words about a cloud of witnesses that we heard in the litany this morning. So what do we have faith in? The Christ, right? Not stonework. The stones will wear away. Not public funding, because public funding seems to disappear. Not faith in the next politician's promise, though some of those commercials are terrifying. Our true faith rests in the Christ, in the hope of things yet unseen in front of us. We trust that God will make all things new, that he'll take the broken and restore it. That we will someday join in those heroes of the faith in the fulfillment of God's promises to us. The Washington Monument sat for 20 years incomplete. It wasn't until 1876, the centennial year, if you will, that Congress finally approved money to begin the construction again, and they took over the power of building it. It was given to the Army Corps of Engineers, and as we know, the Army Corps of Engineers gets things done. It took them 12 more years to make it. So it wasn't until 1888 to actually have a dedication ceremony for that stalk of asparagus that's sticking up in the middle of the wall. That is a long time to wait for a project to come to fruition. And I ask you, why is it so easy for people to believe in a building project, but have a really hard time expressing how fundamental faith is in their lives? Many of us have designated where we think our money that we own right now should go if we die, and we're pretty confident that it will, because we have faith in the monetary system. But it's really hard for us to see our faith legacy into the future. It's complicated. We have to keep building our legacy of faith and trusting in it as much as we do our finances, as much as we do the promises that we can't see fulfilled yet. We point to these heroes of the Bible in Hebrews, and they're all Hebrew Bible men and women who we should imitate. You'll note that these are not people who have been changed by Christ. These are people who are faithfully following God. It's overwhelming. The Washington Monument actually sits at 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches tall. It is still the tallest stone building in the world. Many buildings are taller than it, but they're made of metal. It has an aluminum tip on the top of it that they put there to protect it from lightning strikes, because we felt so faithful that we knew it would last, and it has endured. In 2011, a small earthquake shook the ground in Virginia miles away, and pieces of the monument crumbled. And all of a sudden, everyone was worried. What if the monument falls over? There was structural damage, and so they shrouded it in scaffolding for about 3 years until they could reopen it in 2014, full of faith that it would not fall again, certain that it was fine for tourists to go up and down the elevator and the stairs within the building to look out at the city. How do we have that kind of faith in a building, but we have a difficult time expressing our faith in the person of Christ? As I get ready to close today, I'm going to read you 3 more lines from Hebrews 12, because these people in the prior chapter all had faith in God, faith in the Creator. But the writer of Hebrews is really telling us to have faith in something else. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings to it so closely. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of the faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who has endured such hostilities against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary in your souls or lose heart." So have faith, beloveds. We have something that heroes of faith didn't have. We have Jesus pointing us in the right direction. Take heart. Place your faith there, and it will be growing and growing until we see the things that are currently unseen. Amen.